The trash genre is used to refer to poorly made movies that have a historical and cultural significance. And over the years, this genre changed into the meta-horror production during the 90s and remakes of popular movies during the 2000s. One could say that the recently released Hellboy: The Crooked Man is a product of this genre, an attempt to reignite the legacy of the franchise on the big screen. It is a low-budget effort, but for the fans, it is still Hellboy back in action fighting evil forces like only he can. In this video, we will break down the movie for you and also elaborate on the critical nature and anatomy of the main antagonist, the Crooked Man. There will be some major spoilers along the way, so you have been warned. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. How does the movie set up Hellboy with one of his deadliest opponents? The story is premised during the 1950s, and the movie opens with an action-packed sequence that serves as a solid reminder to the fan what the franchise is all about. Hellboy is in a moving train along with two of his colleagues from the Bureau of Paranormal Research, aka the BPRD. They are in charge of delivering a cargo almost 600 miles away, and it's a large box that contains a deadly creature which will be studied in a controlled environment. Hellboy's female colleague, Jo, reveals that the creature is a Firewise, a deadly spider-like creature that has a demonic entity inside of it. Suddenly, the giant arachnid breaks out of the box, and before they can do anything, it attacks the other colleague and takes his head off. Hellboy manages to save a panicking Jo from the creature, but his intense fight with the massive spider-like creature derails their compartment, and they find themselves in the nearby forest. Hellboy tries to take the creature down, and almost gets the better of it before the creature escapes through a vent in the ground. It is revealed that Jo and Hellboy are in the Appalachian region, and Hellboy detects the presence of something dark and evil in the surrounding. He mentions about the stories of the Crooked Man that he has heard from his father, and Hellboy and Jo head to a nearby house in search of a phone, although a house in the middle of nowhere doesn't have a phone. They do come across a gentle lady and a sickly young boy who has been cursed by the local witch named Cora. The story also introduces another main character, Tom Farrell, who tells us all about the witch. It turns out that he had a prior relationship with Cora before she turned into a witch, and the young boy used to throw stones at her house, which angered and provoked her to curse him with a witch ball, a powerful magical tool. Tom also offers to find Cora, so that the child can be freed from the spell cast on him. Meanwhile, Jo is intrigued by Tom's story, and she is curious if someone like Cora might know anything about the strange creature, like the giant demonic spider that they encountered. She offers to join Tom in his quest of finding the witch, and Hellboy reluctantly agrees. The scene then cuts off to an old witch, who takes us through the gruesome process of preparing a witch ball using the organ and remains of various animals. Finally, they reach Cora's house. But she isn't there, although there is evidence of some dark rituals that have been carried out there. Jo also finds Cora's empty skin, and they assume that the witch will be back to reclaim her body. As the newfound team waits for Cora, we get a quick peek into Hellboy's past as he talks about his mother who was also a witch. Meanwhile, Tom tells them about a horrifying story from his past. Roughly 15 years ago, he had a close encounter with the devil himself, and it all started following his interaction with a woman named Effie, who tried her best to lure him into the dark arts and made him stray from Cora. He managed to stay clear of her temptation, but Tom also offers some details on the Crooked Man and his backstory. He states that the Crooked Man was once an opportunist who fought on both sides of the Civil War and amassed a lot of wealth. However, he was too greedy and found himself executed. Later, the devil turned him into a soul collector, and he was promised that he could regain his wealth someday. Tom had a rather creepy encounter with the Crooked Man, which left him extremely disturbed. He joined the army and participated in the war as means to distract himself, but he noticed that no matter what happened around him, he always survived the situation. This was courtesy of the magical cat bone given to him by Effie, and Tom has kept it with him ever since, even though the cat bone is capable of corrupting people as well. Finally, Cora is back and slips into her skin as the witch comes back to life. Hellboy and Jo head outside to give Tom and Cora some time together, and Cora seems to be quite remorseful for cursing a child out of anger. She also reveals that her husband and children are long dead, and she is clearly anxious and distressed, believing that some evil force is now after her. As Tom tries to comfort her, they all hear something outside. On further inspection, they are shocked to find a bloodied woman as Effie appears before them after so many years. She has not aged in the slightest, and her brief appearance serves as a grim reminder that there is still some unfinished business with the infamous Crooked Man. She also reveals that her horse is actually Tom's father, whom she transformed into the animal ever since he left. After she disappears, the animal writhes in pain and transforms back into Tom's father, and he dies in his arms. Now, Tom is more determined than ever to find the Crooked Man and get his revenge. How do the adventures of the unlikely team fare among the evil powers of the region? Things go from bad to worse, as an insect stings Cora and she faints instantly. Even the others fall into an instant deep sleep. Hellboy tries his best to remain awake and protect Joe, but even he drifts off to sleep. While sleeping, he is disturbed by some visions of his mother being burned to death, presumably for her witchcraft practices. The next morning, they all wake up and set out on their search for the Crooked Man. During the journey, Joe asks Cora about her spells and the motivations that drive her to create them. This is when we get a more detailed backstory of Cora, who admits that she sold her soul to the devil back in the day. Now, she is condemned to be tormented by the likes of the Crooked Man and the mysterious Effie. She also suggests that crafting magic spells requires focus on a painful memory, but Cora warns Joe against trying the same because there are always some adverse consequences to such practices. The journey is interrupted after a while when Hellboy, Joe, and Tom realize that Cora is nowhere around them. After a frantic search, Hellboy spots her floating in the air above them. Everyone watches in shock as a snake slithers up her leg and enters her mouth, and finally, it bites her on the neck. In an attempt to pull the snake away from Cora, Hellboy engages the reptile in a fierce duel. Suddenly, Cora regains her senses and lashes out at Hellboy, but he still manages to finish off the snake. He is then knocked unconscious and is yet another disturbing vision that leaves him disoriented for a while. Meanwhile, Tom is heartbroken when he discovers that Cora is dead and has disappeared into the ground. He feels like the Crooked Man is exacting a price from the people he loves, and now, the journey to find this twisted evil entity must continue. The surviving trio reaches a cemetery with an adjacent church, and this is where Tom intends to bury his father. He even has a brief interaction with the Reverend, who shares a few words of advice for them. After learning that they intend to confront the Crooked Man, the blind Reverend suggests that the Crooked Man must be attacked during the day because he is a lot more powerful during the night. Meanwhile, dozens of witches appear outside the church, waiting for the right moment to attack. Even though a few hours of daylight are still left, it becomes dark abruptly, and the Reverend begins to pray, anticipating the worst. All of a sudden, the corpse of Tom's father seems to have been reanimated, but it is only Effie who conveys to Tom that everyone in the church would be dead because of his action. Tom is almost disoriented, and he steps outside to witness the devotion of the witches toward the Crooked Man. He finally appears with his twisted movements and wavering steps, and the appearance of the Crooked Man is terrifying to say the least. He demands that it is time for him to claim Tom's lucky cat bone and his soul, and Tom agrees to surrender if the Crooked Man promises to harm no one else in the church. However, Hellboy is not going to let something like that happen on his watch, and he steps in to foil the plans of the Crooked Man. He sends Tom back inside the church and offers the Crooked Man an opportunity to escape and take the witches along with him. It turns out that even the Crooked Man is familiar with Hellboy, and this evil entity tries to strike another deal with our protagonist. He offers to free Hellboy's mother Sarah in exchange for his soul, along with Tom. But Hellboy is not the one to be manipulated. He shoots at the Crooked Man, but he turns out to be far too powerful and leaves Hellboy impaled on the iron bars of the church. The situation gets trickier with Effie trying to manipulate Tom, and the Crooked Man offers the Reverend to give up everyone at the church in exchange for a handsome sum of money. As Tom helps the iron rods out of Hellboy's body, the Crooked Man ups his deal with his old Reverend and promises to give him back his eyesight and youth. However, the priest manages to avoid the temptation and continues to pray. How is the Crooked Man finally dealt with? Ending explained. Hellboy and his companions still find themselves cornered at the church as numerous witches wait outside, and the Crooked Man is not giving up on taking their soul. He knows that there is no direct entry into the holy place for his evil minions, but we soon see another glimpse of the Crooked Man's power. He awakens the dead around the compound, and soon, Hellboy, Tom, Joe, and the priest are attacked by hordes of murderous zombies. Even Tom's dead father wakes up and attacks him, and Hellboy does his best to put up a fight, even though the opposition has overwhelming numbers, and he is already injured. Finally, when they are cornered, Tom discovers that the cat bone can be used as a weapon, and its power is activated by the priest. Hellboy then makes quick work of the remaining zombie, and then the Crooked Man is struck hard with a shovel, bearing the magical powers of the cat bone. The evil entity is severely injured and he turns into a raven and flies away to fight another day. Hellboy decides that it is the right time to track him down, and he heads out with Tom while Joe and the Reverend find out more about the vents on the ground in the mines in the region. They head down into the mines through an opening in the church, and Tom and Hellboy come across an abandoned mansion that looks like the Crooked Man's secret hideout. They find him inside, but the Crooked Man is quick and powerful enough to evade Hellboy's bullets, and even vomits flesh-eating bugs on his face. However, it is the cat bone to the rescue yet again, and a moment of distraction is enough for Hellboy to land a powerful blow. Piles of pennies pop out of the Crooked Man's pockets, and he is severely weakened as Hellboy finally obliterates him with a shot to his head. It is also deduced that the real powers lay with Tom all along, and not the cat bone. Later, Effie is also found in a weakened state now that her master, the Crooked Man, is gone. Meanwhile, Joe and the priest encounter hundreds of ravens in the tunnels, and the priest sacrifices himself to protect her. She even encounters the giant arachnid and draws from her painful memories to use magic and defeats the creature. Joe also captures another creature in a container to compensate for the one they lost at the beginning of the movie. It is almost a perfect ending, and the brief encounter between Hellboy and his mother during the final act is also a memorable moment. They leave Tom in charge of overseeing the region, now that the Crooked Man is seemingly banished, and Hellboy and Joe leave for more adventures going ahead. Who is the Crooked Man? Origin and anatomy explored. It wouldn't be a perfect Hellboy movie without an adequate villain, and the Crooked Man is the perfect antagonist that you can ask for. He is cunning, shrewd, and the servant of the devil himself, assigned the task of collecting souls for a penny. Back when he was alive, the Crooked Man was an opportunist who cared for nothing apart from his wealth, and his unhealthy obsession remained even in his afterlife. This evil entity is after Tom in the movie because he is extremely powerful, and the idea was always to make Hellboy kill himself by luring him into his trap. What does the Crooked Man look like? There couldn't have been a more appropriate name for the Crooked Man, because that is exactly the term that comes to mind when you look at him. This unspeakable evil entity is the ideal devil's advocate and looks like a decaying old man in an old suit. His pale yellow teeth and evil stare are backed up by his twisted smile, and he moves in rugged and interrupted movements. However, the real powers of the Crooked Man lie in his magical ability and supernatural power. Also, he can be extremely swift and agile when he needs to be, such as when he was dodging the bullets fired at him by Hellboy. Is the Crooked Man a shapeshifter? What are his major abilities? The Crooked Man is a master shapeshifter, and this helps him get away from tricky situations even if he isn't winning the fight. We have seen him transform into a raven and fly away, and there are indications that he can transform into a reptilian form, or any other form for that matter. His magical powers are insane, supported by the devil himself, and he is a master of illusion and manipulation. He knows the art of manipulating individuals so that he can collect their soul, and he almost succeeds with Tom and Hellboy as well, before his luck runs out. However, if someone can withstand his temptation, the Crooked Man has relatively less powers over that particular individual. He can also reanimate the dead, which is evident from the way he puts his hands into the ground outside the church and awakens the dead as his zombie-like force. He wields certain powers over evil witches and entities like Effie, who serve him and derive their powers from him. When is the Crooked Man vulnerable? How can he be killed? The Crooked Man is not completely invincible because Hellboy does get the better of him in the end. It is revealed that daylight makes him slightly weaker, and he thrives in darkness. But more important, he can be resisted by certain holy and magical items. Hellboy's special gun and bullets do him some damage, but he is able to evade the bullets at first. Also, he is quite dependent on his lust for wealth, and the pennies that he carries are an indication of that. Making him lose a major chunk of his wealth can weaken him significantly, because that is all he ever works for. It is indicated that he is destroyed in the movie, but considering that he is basically an undead evil entity, he might be reprised yet again if they go ahead with a sequel. Marvelous verdict, an honest comic book adaptation. Hellboy the Crooked Man might not be the grandest movie that you have seen in the franchise, but it still has its charms, even though it looks like a fan-made project. Considering how difficult it is to bring Mignola's popular comic hero on screen, it is a decent effort, especially because the narrative makes no attempt to separate itself from the comics that it is based on. It is fun to see a younger Hellboy back in 1955, and the early days of the Bureau for Paranormal Research seem to have some promising adventures. There are some clumsy and awkward moments in the movie, and the effects are definitely below par, but the narrative ends on a high after the story picks up pace in the second half. Overall, the movie is far from a perfect effort, and it is undeniably cheesy in a low-cost production. However, if you are a Hellboy fan, you might want to give this a try for the honest attempt to recreate a genuinely good comic book story. Do share your thoughts in the comments below on the nature of the movie, and also tell us what you think of the main villain, the Crooked Man. If you didn't like the film, make sure you let us know what exactly failed to impress you. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks, everyone.